Jake Martinez wiped his hands on his apron and looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. 3 hours until dinner service, and he had 12 different species to feed tonight. The human crew members were easy enough, but the Cathani needed their food heated to nearly boiling temperatures, while the Verdani could only eat things that were completely raw. Then there were the Zephyrians, who breathed methane and needed their meals prepared in special sealed containers. 15 years he had been doing this job aboard the civilian transport ship New Horizon. 15 years of learning how to make food that every alien species could enjoy. His kitchen had become famous throughout the Outer Rim territories. Captains would request him specifically for their ships. Diplomatic missions insisted on having Jake prepare their meals because he could make everyone happy at the dinner table. The kitchen was his world. Every knife had its place. Every spice was measured and stored exactly where it should be. Jake had collected knives from dozens of different planets. Some were made from metals that didn't even exist on Earth. Others were simple steel blades that reminded him of his grandfather's kitchen back home. Each one was special to him. Each one was maintained with care that bordered on religious devotion. His assistant, Amy Collins, was chopping vegetables at the prep station. She had been working with Jake for 3 years now and knew his methods well. Amy was young and eager to learn everything about cooking for different species. She asked endless questions about spice combinations and temperature controls. Jake enjoyed teaching her. It reminded him of when he first started cooking and everything seemed like magic. "The Verdani ambassador wants extra greens tonight," Amy said without looking up from her cutting board. "Something about a celebration on their home world." Jake nodded and moved to the storage unit where he kept the special hydroponic vegetables. The Verdani were plant-like beings who got their energy from photosynthesis, but they still enjoyed eating for social reasons. Their food had to be completely fresh, never frozen, never cooked. Jake had learned to grow their preferred plants in special chambers that mimicked their home world's sunlight. Captain Lisa Johnson's voice came over the communication system. "Attention all crew. We have received a distress signal from the research station on Kepler 442b. We are changing course to provide assistance. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours. Jake continued his prep work. Distress calls were common in this part of space. Pirates, equipment failures, medical emergencies. The New Horizon was equipped for rescue operations, and Captain Johnson never ignored a call for help. It meant Jake would need to prepare extra food for whatever survivors they picked up. He selected his favorite knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. It was a Santoku blade with a carbon steel edge that he had bought on a space station near Proxima Centauri. The metal came from an asteroid that was billions of years old. Jake had spent weeks learning how to sharpen it properly. The edge was so fine it could cut through silk without disturbing the weave. The blade felt perfect in his hand, balanced, precise. Jake began slicing through a pile of root vegetables that would go into tonight's stew. The knife moved through the vegetables like they were made of air. Each cut was exactly the same thickness. This was meditation for Jake. The rhythm of chopping, the sound of the blade on the cutting board, the perfect uniformity of each slice. Amy watched him work with admiration. "I still don't understand how you make it look so easy," she said. "Practice," Jake replied. 15 years of practice and respect for the tools. He moved to the spice cabinet and began selecting ingredients for the evening's meals. Terran black pepper for the humans. Kethani flame powder that burned like liquid fire. Zephyrian aromatics that smelled like ozone and metal. Each species had evolved different taste preferences based on their home worlds. Jake had to understand not just how to cook for them, but why they liked certain flavors. The New Horizon was not a military vessel. It carried diplomats, scientists, traders, and travelers between the inner colonies and the frontier worlds. The crew was mixed species, about 40 beings in total. Jake knew them all by name. He knew their favorite foods, their allergies, their birthdays. Cooking for them was more than a job. It was taking care of family. Dr. Kevin Foster, the ship's science officer, stopped by the kitchen for his afternoon snack. He was human, but he had developed a taste for Verdani fruit during his studies of plant-based life forms. Jake had special arrangements with suppliers to get the exotic fruits that Kevin loved. "Any idea what kind of emergency we're heading into?" Jake asked, as he handed Kevin a perfectly ripe piece of Verdani sweet fruit. Kevin shrugged. "Could be anything." That research station was studying the planet's geology. "Looking for rare minerals, I think. Communications went dark 3 days ago." Jake nodded and returned to his work. Emergency or not, people would need to eat. He began preparing. Extra portions of everything. Protein bars for quick energy. Hot soup for comfort. Fresh bread. Because nothing made people feel better than the smell of baking bread. The afternoon passed quietly. Jake and Amy worked together in the smooth rhythm they had developed over years of partnership. She handled the simple preparations, while he focused on the complex dishes that required special techniques. The Kethani meals had to be cooked in environments that would kill most other species. The Zephyrian food needed to be prepared in chambers filled with methane gas. As dinner time approached, Jake could feel the familiar excitement building in his chest. This was his favorite time of day, when the crew members would start arriving in the dining hall, when he could see their faces light up as they tasted his food, when the different species would sit together and share meals despite coming from worlds that were light years apart. The first crew members began filing into the dining hall. Jake watched through the serving window as they took their seats. Lieutenant Commander Rachel White, the ship's security chief, sat with 3 of her officers. They were discussing duty schedules and patrol routes. Dr. Nancy Wright, the archaeologist, was reading from a tablet while she ate. She was always studying something from some ancient civilization. Tony Rodriguez from the engineering department was complaining about a malfunction in the hyperdrive cooling system. His dinner companions, 2 Verdani technicians, were offering suggestions in their musical language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. This was why Jake loved his job. The dining hall was where the crew became a family, where differences in biology and culture melted away over shared meals, where a human chef could make a Kethani warrior smile by getting the seasoning exactly right. Captain Johnson's voice came over the comm again. "All crew, we are approaching the research station. No response to our hails. Sensors show the station is intact, but reading no life signs. Away team report to Shuttle Bay in 30 minutes. Jake began cleaning his knives and putting away the ingredients. He always cleaned as he cooked. It was a habit from his early days when he worked in cramped ship kitchens where space was precious. Every tool had to be clean and ready for the next use. Amy was wiping down the prep stations when she asked, "Do you ever miss Earth? Cooking for just humans?" Jake considered the question as he tested the edge on his Santoku blade. It was still perfect, sharp enough to shave with. "No," he said finally. "This is better. More challenging, more rewarding." He placed the knife back on its magnetic strip with the others. 23 blades in total, each one a tool he had mastered. Each one an extension of his hands and his skills. Tomorrow he would use them to create meals that would nourish bodies and bring joy to beings from across the galaxy. But tonight, Jake Martinez was just a chef cleaning his kitchen after another successful dinner service. He had no idea that in a few hours those same knives would become something entirely different, something that would change not just his life, but the course of human history among the stars. The research station hung in space like a dead insect against the backdrop of Kepler 442b. Jake could see it through the kitchen's small porthole as the New Horizon moved closer. The station was bigger than he had expected, with multiple sections, connected by long corridors, solar panels spread out like wings, but they were dark. No lights showed in any of the windows. Captain Johnson's voice crackled over the comm system. "Away team to Shuttle Bay. We're going aboard to investigate." Jake returned to his prep work for tomorrow's breakfast. He was making dough for fresh bread when Amy came running into the kitchen. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, pointing at the security monitor that showed feeds from around the ship. The screen displayed the shuttle bay where the away team was preparing to leave. Jake could see Lieutenant Commander Rachel White checking her equipment. Dr. Kevin Foster was adjusting his scanner. 4 security officers were loading their weapons and running final checks on their gear. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" Jake asked. "Not that screen," Amy said. "The external cameras." She switched the monitor to show the view from the ship's hull cameras. The research station filled the screen now, close enough to see details of its construction. Jake was about to ask what had Amy so worried when he saw it. Something was moving inside the station. Dark shapes that flowed like liquid through the corridors. They moved too fast and too fluid to be human or any alien species Jake knew. The shapes seemed to absorb light, creating patches of absolute darkness that hurt to look at. "What are those things?" Amy whispered. Jake had no answer. In 15 years of traveling through space, he had never seen anything like the creatures moving through the research station. They didn't walk or crawl. They flowed like oil, but they moved with purpose, like they were hunting something. The away team's shuttle launched from the New Horizon and began its approach to the station's docking bay. Jake watched the pilot, Chief Petty Officer Ryan Clark, guide the small craft toward the darkened station. The shuttle's lights illuminated the docking bay entrance, but showed nothing moving inside. "Away team, this is the bridge," came Captain Johnson's voice over the comm. "We're reading some unusual energy signatures from the station. Stay alert." Lieutenant Commander White's response came through clearly. "Copy that, Captain. Beginning docking procedures now." Jake tried to focus on his bread dough, but he kept glancing at the monitor. Something about those dark shapes bothered him. They moved too smoothly, like they weren't bound by the same physical laws as everything else. When they passed through lit areas, they seemed to bend the light around them. The shuttle docked successfully, and the away team disembarked into the station. Their helmet cameras provided feeds that Jake could see on the kitchen monitor. The station's corridors were clean and undamaged but completely empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to the research team. Life support is functioning normally, Dr. Foster reported. Atmosphere is breathable. No toxic readings. The team moved deeper into the station, their weapons ready. The corridors were standard design for research facilities. White walls, bright lighting, signs pointing to different departments. Everything looked normal except for the complete absence of people. Jake was shaping his bread dough when the first scream came through the comm system. It was one of the security officers, a young man named Pete Jackson. His scream was cut short, replaced by a sound like static mixed with something wet and tearing. The feed from his helmet camera went dark. "Jackson, report!" Lieutenant Commander White shouted into her communicator. "Pete, do you copy?" There was no response. The remaining team members moved toward Jackson's last known position, their weapons raised. Jake found himself holding his breath as he watched the monitor. They found Jackson's equipment scattered in a corridor, but no sign of Jackson himself. His weapon was there, still fully charged. His helmet was cracked but intact. But Pete Jackson had simply vanished. "Something's wrong here," Dr. Foster said, his scanner beeping rapidly. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations, like nothing in our databases." That was when the creatures attacked. They came through the walls like they were made of air. Dark, flowing shapes that moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen. The security officers opened fire immediately, but their energy weapons passed right through the creatures without causing any damage. Jake watched in horror as the things engulfed the away team members one by one. Each person they touched simply collapsed, their bodies becoming dry and withered in seconds. It was like the creatures were draining the life out of them. Lieutenant Commander White tried to retreat toward the shuttle, but more creatures appeared to block her path. Her final transmission was a desperate warning to the ship. "Captain, do not send anyone else. The weapons don't work. They're some kind of energy beings. They're coming through the hull." The communication cut off. All the helmet camera feeds went dark. The away team was gone. Jake stared at the monitor in shock. 7 people had just died in front of his eyes, and there was nothing anyone could have done to save them. The creatures had moved through solid matter like it wasn't there. Military weapons had been useless against them. "Jake," Amy said in a small voice, "look at the external cameras." He switched the monitor back to the hull cameras and felt his blood turn cold. The dark creatures were flowing out of the research station and moving toward the new horizon. They traveled through open space without any protection, moving like shadows across the star field. Captain Johnson's voice came over the ship's general comm. "All hands, we have hostile contact. Unknown entities are approaching the ship. All crew to emergency stations." Security teams, arm yourselves and prepare for boarding action. Jake knew the security teams wouldn't stand a chance. If military-grade weapons couldn't hurt these things, what could the ship's security officers do? They would die just like the away team had died. The creatures reached the New Horizons hull and began passing through it like it was made of paper. Jake could hear shouting and weapon fire from other parts of the ship. He could hear screams. Amy grabbed his arm. "What do we do?" she asked. Jake looked around his kitchen, at his knives hanging on their magnetic strips, at his prep stations and cooking equipment. At the bread dough he had been working on just minutes before, when the biggest danger in his life was getting breakfast ready on time. The kitchen door opened, and one of the creatures flowed inside. Up close, it was even, more terrifying than on the monitors. It had no fixed shape, but Jake could sense intelligence in the way it moved. It was studying him and Amy, deciding which one to kill first. The thing radiated cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of empty space, of death, of something that should not exist. Jake stepped in front of Amy without thinking. His hand reached for the nearest knife, the Santoku blade he had been using earlier. The creature moved toward them, flowing across the floor like spilled ink. Jake gripped the knife handle and swung at the approaching monster. The blade cut through the creature's form like it was cutting through butter. The thing let out a sound. That was part scream, part static, part something that made Jake's teeth ache. Then it simply disappeared, dissolving into nothing. Jake stared at his knife in amazement. The blade looked exactly the same as it had before. Sharp, clean, ordinary. But somehow it had destroyed something that energy weapons couldn't even touch. Amy emerged from behind the prep station where she had been hiding. "How did you do that?" she whispered. Jake had no idea. He was just a chef. He cooked food and kept his knives sharp and took care of his crew. There was nothing special about him or his equipment. Nothing that should have made any difference against creatures that could pass through solid matter. But the knife had worked. Somehow, impossibly, his simple steel blade had cut through something that seemed to be made of pure energy. Another creature flowed into the kitchen through the far wall. Then another. Jake raised his knife again, not understanding what was happening, but knowing he had to protect Amy. He had to protect his crew. The second creature died as easily as the first. So did the third. Each time Jake's blade touched them, they screamed and vanished. Each time Jake felt more confused but more determined. These things had killed the away team. They were killing his friends throughout the ship. They thought they could come into his kitchen and threaten the people he cared about. Jake Martinez was just a chef. But this was his kitchen. These were his knives, and nobody was going to hurt his family while he was still breathing. Word spread through the ship faster than Jake could have imagined. Within minutes of his first successful fight against the creatures, every surviving crew member knew that the cook had found a way to kill the things that were hunting them. "Captain," Johnson's voice came over the comm system, requesting that Jake report to the bridge immediately. Jake hesitated at the kitchen door, his Santoku knife still in his hand. The corridor outside looked normal, but he knew the creatures could appear anywhere without warning. Amy stayed close behind him as they made their way through the ship's passages toward the bridge. They passed the bodies of crew members who hadn't been as lucky. The creatures left their victims dried out and withered, like plants that had been left in a desert for months. Jake recognized some of the faces, people he had cooked for every day for years, friends who would never taste his food again. The bridge was crowded with survivors. Captain Johnson stood at the center, coordinating damage reports and trying to understand what they were facing. Dr. Kevin Foster was at a science station, running scans on data from the failed away team mission. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Clark was at the helm, keeping the ship at a safe distance from the research station. "Jake," Captain Johnson said when she saw him enter, "I understand you found a way to fight these things." Jake held up his knife. "I don't understand it myself, Captain. The blade just cuts through them like they're solid." Dr. Foster looked up from his instruments. "May I examine the weapon?" Jake handed over the knife carefully. Foster ran it through several scanning devices, checking its molecular composition and energy signature. The results made him frown. "There's nothing unusual about this knife," Foster said. "Standard carbon steel, properly maintained but completely ordinary. By all laws of physics, it shouldn't be able to affect energy beings." "But it does," Amy said. "I saw it happen 3 times. Foster handed the knife back to Jake. "Try it again. See if the effect is repeatable." There was no need to wait for a test opportunity. 2 of the dark creatures flowed through the bridge's rear bulkhead, moving with that same liquid grace that made Jake's skin crawl. The bridge crew scattered, reaching for weapons that they knew wouldn't work. Jake stepped forward and slashed at the first creature with his knife. The blade passed through its form, and the thing dissolved with that horrible scream-static sound. The second creature tried to flow around Jake to reach the other crew members, but Jake was faster. His knife found it before it could escape, and it died just as easily as the others. Dr. Foster stared at his instruments in amazement. The energy reading spiked the moment your blade made contact. It's like the knife is somehow disrupting their molecular cohesion. "Can we replicate it?" Captain Johnson asked. "Make more weapons that work the same way?" Foster shook his head. "I don't even understand how it's working. The knife itself shows no unusual properties." That was when Dr. Nancy Wright spoke up from her position at a research terminal. The elderly archaeologist had been studying data about the creatures since the attack began. "I think I know what's happening," she said quietly. "I've been reviewing references to similar entities in ancient texts from a dozen different civilizations. Energy beings that can phase through matter. Creatures that drain life force from their victims." She brought up displays on the main screen showing archaeological records from across known space. Stone tablets, metal inscriptions, digital archives from long-dead civilizations, all describing encounters with dark entities that matched what they were facing. The common factor in every successful defense against these beings was the use of objects that carried what the texts call emotional resonance. Wright continued. Items that had been touched by genuine passion and dedication over long periods of time. Captain Johnson looked skeptical. "You're saying the knife works because Jake cares about it?" "More than that," Wright said. "These creatures exist partially, outside normal space-time. They're vulnerable to objects that have been shaped by strong human emotions. Jake's knives have been maintained with love and dedication for 15 years. That emotional imprint gives them power against these things. To test the theory, Foster suggested that other crew members try using Jake's knives. Chief Clark volunteered first, taking the Santoku blade and approaching one of the creature corpses that lay scattered on the bridge floor. But when he swung the knife at the remains, nothing happened. The blade passed through the dead creature, without effect. "It only works for Jake," Amy observed. Wright nodded. "The emotional connection has to be personal. The knife responds to Jake because he formed the bond with it through years of use and care." Jake looked at the blade in his hand with new understanding. It wasn't just a tool for cutting vegetables. It was an extension of himself, shaped by thousands of hours of practice and perfection. Every meal he had prepared, every time he had, sharpened the edge, every moment of satisfaction when the blade performed exactly as he needed it to. "How many of these creatures are there?" Captain Johnson asked. Foster checked his sensors. "I'm reading at least 20 more throughout the ship. They seem to be searching for something, moving in organized patterns." "They're hunting us," Jake said. "Looking for the crew members who are still alive." The captain turned to him with a grim expression. "Can you fight 20 of them?" Jake tested the weight of his knife, feeling its perfect balance in his hand. "I don't know, but I'm willing to try." "Not alone," Wright said. "According to the historical records, these creatures learn from their encounters. They'll adapt to your tactics if you give them time." As if to prove her point, the ship's comm system crackled with reports from other decks. The creatures had found more crew members hiding in storage compartments and maintenance areas. The sounds of dying came through the speakers, making everyone on the bridge flinch. "We need to move fast," Jake said, "before they kill everyone else." Captain Johnson began organizing the remaining bridge crew. Foster would monitor the creatures' positions using the ship's internal sensors. Clark would coordinate communications with any other survivors. Wright would continue researching the creature's weaknesses. Jake selected 2 more knives from his belt, a smaller paring blade and a flexible filleting knife. Each one felt right in his hands, familiar and trusted. Each one carried years of his dedication and skill. "Jake," Amy said as he prepared to leave the bridge, "be careful." He nodded and headed for the door. The corridors of the New Horizon had become a hunting ground, but Jake was no longer just prey. He was armed with weapons that could fight back, and he knew every inch of this ship. Behind him, Dr. Wright's voice carried one final piece of information from her research. The ancient texts mention something else. The more these weapons are used against the creatures, the stronger they become. Success builds on success. Jake paused at the bridge entrance. "What does that mean?" "It means," Wright said, "that if you can keep winning, you'll get better at it. The emotional resonance will grow stronger with each victory." Jake nodded and stepped into the corridor. He could sense the creatures somewhere in the ship, hunting his friends and crewmates. They thought they were the only predators here. They were about to learn differently. Jake Martinez was going hunting too, and he had 15 years of knife skills to help him do it right. Jake moved through the corridors of the New Horizon like he was working in his kitchen during the dinner rush. Every step was calculated, every movement efficient. He had walked these passages thousands of times over 15 years, delivering meals and checking on crew members. Now that knowledge was keeping him alive. Dr. Foster's voice came through his communicator. "Jake, I'm reading 3 creatures on Deck 7, Section C. That's near the crew quarters." Jake changed direction, moving toward the lower decks. His 3 knives felt comfortable in his hands, the santoku in his right hand and the smaller blades held ready in his left. The paring knife was perfect for quick, precise cuts, while the filleting knife could bend and flex to follow any target. He found the first crew members on Deck 7. 2 Verdani technicians had barricaded themselves in a storage room, but the creatures were flowing through the walls to reach them. Jake arrived just as one of the dark beings emerged from the bulkhead next to the sealed door. The creature turned toward Jake with what might have been surprise. It moved fast, faster than anything Jake had ever seen, but his hands were faster. The santoku blade cut through its center mass, and the thing dissolved with that familiar scream-static sound. The second creature tried to escape back through the wall, but Jake anticipated its movement. His filleting knife caught it before it could phase completely through the metal, and it died just as easily as the first. Jake opened the storage room door and found the 2 Verdani huddled inside. Their plant-like forms were trembling with fear, their normally green skin pale with shock. "You are safe now," Jake told them in their musical language. "Go to the bridge. Captain Johnson is organizing survivors there." The Verdani hurried away toward the upper decks, while Jake continued his hunt. Foster's voice guided him through the ship, tracking the creatures as they moved from section to section. Each encounter was different, but the result was always the same. Jake's knives cut through the energy beings like they were made of smoke. On Deck 5, he found Chief Petty Officer Tony Rodriguez trapped in an engineering compartment. 3 creatures were trying to break through the heavy blast door, while Tony worked frantically to reinforce the seals from inside. Jake attacked from behind, his 3 knives moving in a pattern he had learned from years of prep work. Slice, cut, dice. The creatures never had a chance to react. "Jake!" Tony called out when the door opened. "How are you doing this?" "Long story," Jake replied. "Get to the bridge. Tell Foster I'm moving to Deck 3 next." But Deck 3 was where Jake learned that the creatures were adapting to his tactics. He was moving through the recreation area when 4 of the dark beings emerged from different directions. Instead of attacking individually like before, they moved as a coordinated group. One came from the front while another flanked from the left. The third dropped from the ceiling while the fourth rose from the floor. Jake found himself spinning in place, his knives flashing out to meet each attack. The santoku caught the creature in front while his paring knife stopped the one on his left. But the ceiling attacker managed to brush against his shoulder before his filleting knife could reach it. The touch was like being hit with liquid nitrogen, cold, that burned through his clothes and into his skin. Jake stumbled but managed to complete his cut, destroying the 4th creature before it could fully emerge from the floor. "Jake, are you injured?" Foster's voice crackled through the comm. Jake flexed his shoulder, feeling the numbness where the creature had touched him. "I'm fine, but they're getting smarter. They're working together now. Be careful." I'm reading more creatures converging. On your position. Jake checked his knives. The blades were still sharp, still perfectly maintained, but something felt different. Each successful fight seemed to make them feel more balanced in his hands, more responsive to his movements. Dr. Wright had been right about the weapons growing stronger with use. He moved deeper into the ship, following Foster's directions toward the largest concentration of creatures. They had gathered in the main cargo bay, apparently attracted by something in that section. When Jake arrived, he understood why. 15 crew members had taken shelter in the cargo bay, thinking the heavy bulkheads would protect them. But the creatures could pass through any solid matter, and now 8 of the dark beings were circling the trapped survivors like sharks around wounded fish. This was the largest group Jake had faced at once. He studied their movements, looking for patterns like he would study a complex recipe. The creatures moved in pairs, supporting each other's attacks. They had learned from their earlier defeats and were adapting their tactics. Jake took a deep breath and entered the cargo bay. The first 2 creatures came at him from opposite sides, trying to force him to choose which one to block. But Jake had spent years working with multiple pans on a busy stove, tracking several dishes at once while maintaining perfect timing. His santoku swept left, while his paring knife went right. Both creatures died simultaneously. The next pair tried a vertical attack, one high and one low. Jake dropped into a crouch, letting the high attacker pass over him while his filleting knife curved upward to catch it. The low attacker met his santoku blade as Jake rolled to his feet. 4 down, 4 to go. But the remaining creatures had been watching and learning. They attacked all at once, coming from every direction in a coordinated rush that should have been impossible to defend against. Jake discovered something in that moment that surprised him. All those years of knife work had given him more than just skill with blades. They had given him spatial awareness, the ability to track multiple moving objects and respond to them instinctively. His hands moved without conscious thought, following patterns burned into his muscle memory by thousands of hours of practice. The 3 knives became extensions of his will, cutting through the attacking creatures with precision that amazed even Jake himself. In less than 10 seconds, all 8 beings were gone. The trapped crew members stared at him in wonder. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Rachel White's replacement, a young security officer named Danny Cole, who had taken command after the away team was lost. "How did you do that?" Danny asked. "You moved like you knew exactly where they were going to be." Jake wiped his blades clean on a cloth from his belt. "Kitchen work teaches you to track a lot of moving parts at once. You have to know where everything is and what it's doing." Foster's voice came through the comm with urgency. "Jake, we have a problem. I'm reading massive energy spikes from the research station. Something big is happening over there." Through the cargo bay's viewports, Jake could see the research station in the distance. It was glowing now with the same dark energy as the creatures. Pulses of shadow light rippled across its hull in waves. "More of them are coming," Foster continued. "A lot more. Sensors show at least 50 energy signatures leaving the station and heading for our ship." Jake looked at his 3 knives, then at the 15 crew members he had just saved. 50 creatures would be more than he had ever faced before. But somewhere in the ship, there were still more crew members hiding, waiting for rescue. "Danny," he said to the security officer, "get everyone to the bridge. Make sure they stay together and watch for more creatures." "What about you?" Danny asked. Jake tested the edge on his Santoku blade with his thumb. Still perfect. Still sharp. Enough to cut through energy beings that could pass through solid matter. "I'm going to keep hunting," he said. "These things think they can come aboard my ship and hurt my crew. They're about to learn how wrong they are." As the crew members hurried toward the bridge, Jake prepared himself for the biggest fight of his life. 50 creatures against one chef with 3 knives and 15 years of kitchen experience. The odds should have been impossible, but Jake Martinez was discovering that impossible didn't mean much when you had the right tools and the determination to use them. Jake chose the main dining hall for his final stand. It was the largest open space on the ship, with multiple entry points that would prevent the creatures from trapping him in a corner. But more than that, it was the place where he had served thousands of meals over 15 years. If he was going to make his last fight, it would be in the room where he had brought joy to so many different species. The dining hall felt different now. The tables and chairs had been moved aside to create an open area in the center. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, where Jake had hung pictures of crew members celebrating birthdays and promotions. This had been a place of friendship and community. Now it would become a battlefield. Dr. Foster's voice came through the comm system. "Jake, they're almost here. 52 energy signatures moving through the ship toward your position. Are you sure about this?" Jake stood. In the center of the dining hall, his 3 knives held ready, the Santoku in his right hand, the paring knife and filleting blade in his left. Each weapon felt like an extension of his body, perfectly balanced and responsive to his thoughts. "I'm sure," he said into his communicator. "This is where it ends." "Captain," Johnson's voice joined the conversation. "Jake, we can try to evacuate the ship. Take the remaining crew to the escape pods." "No," Jake replied. "These things will just follow us. They'll hunt down every human in the galaxy unless someone stops them here." The first creatures began flowing through the walls of the dining hall. Not the individual attackers Jake had faced before, but a coordinated mass of darkness that moved like a living shadow. They entered from every direction at once, surrounding Jake in a circle of writhing energy. Jake counted them as they appeared. 52, just as Foster had predicted, more than he had ever faced at one time, more than should have been possible for one person to fight. But Jake had learned something important during his hunts through the ship. The creatures were intelligent, but they followed patterns, and patterns could be disrupted by someone who understood timing and flow. The attack began without warning. 20 creatures rushed him from different angles while the others held back, ready to exploit any opening. Jake moved like he was working a busy dinner service, his body flowing from one position to another without wasted motion. His Santoku swept through 3 attackers on his right, while his paring knife caught 2 more. Coming from the left, the filleting blade curved around to stop a flanking attack from behind, but there were too many of them. Even as he destroyed 5 creatures, 10 more pressed in to take their places. A creature managed to brush against his back, leaving a patch of burning cold that made Jake stumble. Another caught his left arm, numbing his fingers and making it harder to grip his smaller knives. But Jake kept fighting, his blades moving in patterns he had perfected over years of kitchen work. Slice, dice, cut. The rhythm was the same whether he was preparing vegetables or destroying energy beings. Economy of motion, perfect timing, absolute precision. Jake's knives moved through the attacking creatures like he was carving a roast for Sunday dinner. But the creatures were learning too. They began attacking in waves, forcing Jake to defend against multiple directions, while others tried to drain his energy with glancing touches. His movements became more desperate as the cold burns accumulated on his arms and shoulders. That was when Jake discovered something that Dr. Wright's ancient texts hadn't mentioned. The more he fought, the more connected he became to his knives. Each successful strike seemed to charge the blades with additional power, making them cut deeper and react faster. Success was building on success, just as Wright had predicted. The Santoku blade began to glow with a faint light that hurt the creature's energy forms. The paring knife moved so fast it left trails in the air. The filleting blade bent and flexed, like it was alive, seeking out targets with increasing accuracy. Jake's movements became more fluid, more precise. He wasn't just fighting the creatures anymore. He was dancing with them, anticipating their attacks and countering with moves that seemed impossible. His 15 years of kitchen experience had taught him to work efficiently under pressure. But this was something more. This was artistry. 20 creatures down. 30. 40. The remaining energy beings tried a desperate final assault, attacking all at once in a coordinated rush that filled the dining hall with writhing darkness. Jake found himself moving without conscious thought, his body and blades working together in perfect harmony. The Santoku cut through the center of the attack while his other knives swept the flanks. He spun and turned, his weapons creating a shield of steel that no creature could penetrate. Each strike was exactly where it needed to be, each movement flowing into the next like notes in a perfect symphony. When the last creature dissolved with its characteristic scream-static sound, Jake stood alone in the center of the dining hall. His 3 knives still glowed faintly with the power they had gained during the fight. His clothes were torn and his body ached from the cold burns, but he was alive. Dr. Foster's voice came through the comm, filled with amazement. Jake, the energy readings from the research station are dropping. Whatever was controlling those things, I think you just killed it. Jake looked at his knives with new understanding. They weren't just tools anymore. They had become something more through his dedication and skill, charged with an emotional resonance that could affect beings of pure energy. The creatures had been vulnerable to human passion and craftsmanship, and Jake had both in abundance. Captain Johnson's voice joined the conversation. "Jake, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Captain," Jake replied, though his voice was hoarse from exertion. "The dining hall is secure." Over the next few hours, rescue ships arrived from the nearest military base. Jake found himself answering questions from scientists and military officers who wanted to understand how a civilian chef had defeated an entire invasion force of energy beings. He tried to explain about emotional resonance and dedication to craft, but most of them didn't really understand. They saw only the weapons and the tactical achievement, missing the deeper truth about human connection to their tools and their work. Dr. Wright understood, though. She compiled a report about the battle that would become required reading at military academies throughout human space. The victory at Kepler 442b would be remembered as the first successful human defense against the energy beings that came to be known as the Umbral. But Jake didn't think much about fame or historical significance. When the interviews were over and the research was complete, he returned to his kitchen aboard the New Horizon. He cleaned his knives carefully, just as he always had, and began planning the next day's menu. Amy found him there, quietly preparing soup for the crew members who had survived the battle. Many of them were still in shock from what they had experienced. They needed comfort food, something warm and familiar to help them feel normal again. "You saved us all," Amy said as she watched him work. Jake continued chopping vegetables without looking up. The rhythm was soothing after the chaos of battle. "I just did what I knew how to do," he replied. "I took care of my crew." The galaxy would remember Jake Martinez as the chef who became a warrior, the man who turned kitchen knives into weapons that could cut through beings of pure energy. Military strategists would study his techniques. Scientists would analyze his weapons. Philosophers would debate the nature of his victory, but Jake would always think of himself as exactly what he had been before the battle. A chef who took pride in his work and cared for the people he served. The only difference was that now, when he picked up his knives to prepare a meal, he understood that in human hands, even the simplest tools could become something extraordinary. Tuck. Dining hall where he had fought his greatest battle was repaired and returned to its original purpose. Crew members gathered there each night to share meals and tell stories. Sometimes they talked about the day their cook saved the ship with nothing but kitchen knives and 15 years of dedication to his craft. Jake would listen to those stories while he worked in his kitchen, and he would smile. Because he knew the real truth. It hadn't been the knives that won the battle. It had been love. Love for his crew, love for his work, and love for the simple act of taking care of other people. That was something worth fighting for. That was something worth living for. And if the Umbral ever returned, Jake Martinez would be ready for them, with sharp knives and a determination to protect the family he had found among the stars.